The personality of my real self is created by God. The expression of my real self is controlled by myself alone. The development of my real self is controlled by myself. Now, what questions do you have about that so far? Yep, Sue?
I feel that I've got no idea who my real self is.
I agree. Most people have no idea who their real self is, and we'll talk about that in a minute as to why that's the case. Yeah. But it is controlled by you alone. That's a scary thought, isn't it? I've got no idea who my real self is, but it's all controlled by my real self. God, what trouble am I in already, right? Yeah, this is how it is for most of us. My real self has the ability to grow and change, and actually with God's love has the ability to transform into a different being than it was originally created. This is a remarkable thing about your soul. It's just like everything I've ever found out about the human soul, and I've spent a lot of time studying the human soul in my life, I've just been blown away by its complex design that is absolutely incredible for future, it enables future everlasting infinite expansion. Like, it's the only thing that does that in the entire universe, right? So I'm talking inside the universe God created. The human soul is the only thing that infinitely has the potential for expansion. Right? Pretty amazing design. It's just, there is so many things I'd like to say about your real self, but we're not going to get to cover it today. There's a lot of things to learn here. Remember here, we're trying to educate you about love. This is the education you didn't get, right? So remember, we're learning about these things. So at my conception, my real self has not been hurt and did not play facades. Now, of course, shortly after conception, it was hurt and began to play the exact same facades that the parents played. All right? So this is the problem. But the real self is without those things, in its pure state. Now, I want to focus your attention on a few things here. Firstly, you can see that the real self, the development of it, is controlled by myself. This is a very important thing to understand. You are, right at this stage, right at this moment, you are controlling your own development. No, there's no magical thing outside of you that controls your development. You are it. You're the thing that determines where you go from here. Very important that you understand that. Right? And what we need to do is see what we're developing before we can actually talk about that more. So let's look at some of that. Now, we can call our real self God's child, which is exactly what we are. That is who you are, God's child. I am God's child. We're all God's children. In fact, we're all half of one of God's children. And the other half is somewhere out there in the universe as well. Okay, so what does this emotional self that's real feel like? What kind of qualities does it have from an emotional perspective? You follow? This is what we want to look at. It's sensitive, aware, perceptive, and insightful. This is your real self. It was created to have this ability instinctually. Your real self instinctually is expressive, animated, communicative, open, and unrestrained. That's your real self. It was created to instinctually be that way. So you could say the personality traits and the instincts that your soul has are to be this way. So we're already a long way away from that, right? For most of us, but that's what it's honest, truthful, sincere, frank, candid, blunt, and transparent. Right? That's part of your real self. And you think about, in your day-to-day life, how often are you candid, blunt, and transparent? For the majority of us, we're definitely not candid, and we're certainly not blunt. And when it comes to transparency, no, we're black, we're not even opaque for many of us. Nobody even knows what's going on inside of most of us, right? It's adventurous, courageous, daring, bold, creative, brave, and audacious. They're lovely words, aren't they? Describing the real self. Yep. Is curious, inquisitive, questioning, probing, searching, and inquiring. Really lovely qualities too, those. In fact, those qualities, part of your instinctual nature. By the way, all of you have these qualities. All of you. This is not a personality thing. This is what God has designed in every single soul. If God had put some of these qualities in me and not in you, then wouldn't that be unfair? These are instinctual qualities of the real self. Undeveloped, untrained, but there, present. And you just look at that one, the curious, inquisitive, questioning, probing, that's going to be a key part of your development, isn't it? You can see your child already engaging that, can't you? The child engaging that in their learning process, key part of their development. Right? When you get all like you feel like you already know everything and all that, we're a long way away from that. Long way away. It's emotional, feeling, sensing, sensual. All right? So when you say to yourself, I'm just not as emotional as the average person. Sorry. All of you have been created with the same capacity to feel emotion. Every single one of you. And there's no difference in scale. You all have the same capacity to feel emotion. You're all feeling emotion differently now because of what's happened to you. But you all have the same capacity. Now, it can develop to become... Now, this is very different than having instinctual qualities now. This is going to be dependent upon what you choose to do with these instinctual qualities. Does that make sense? It can develop to become wise, intelligent, clever, gifted, and logical. It can develop to become sensible, practical, responsible, accountable, dependable, and rational. So you know how the logical song from Supertramp goes, when I was young, it seemed that life was so... whatever, I can't remember all the words. You don't need to look it up either. But remember, there's a thing, they made me a way to become sensible. Being sensible is a natural quality of the soul you can develop. You can be sensible. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It's a good thing. And you need to be accountable. You need to be dependable, practical, responsible. These are things that you need to develop in yourself. But they are developed. They're not there automatically. And the most important, can develop to become loving, caring, kind, gentle, considerate, and compassionate. Love is not a given to the soul. It is a potential developed quality. Because there's plenty of people who do not have it developed, right? Yep. See this new age concept that, there's a spark of love in everyone. I don't know if I can agree with that. Right? Initially, you're created like a container. You are the structure of your soul, and it has the potential to become loving. and kind and considerate and compassionate, but it also has the potential to become very evil, like just as much potential to go that direction. Right? And it depends on the choices, the will, the way the will's used. Thanks, Linda.
Linda, so thank you so much. This is such a wonderful tool, because I'm feeling that if I use this information now to uncover my real self, if I just focus on how sensitive am I, how aware am I, how perceptive am I,
Yep.
or not,
Yep.
then I can really look and see how far or how close I am to discovering my real self, can't I?
Can I yes, all of that's true with the exception of one word. You keep
Okay.
using the term discovering.
Oh, okay.
Now, the term discovering implies that there's a whole heap of
it's
things that are
unknown.
already there,
Okay.
and not all of these things are already there.
No.
Some of them have to be developed.
Yes.
So it's not just about discovering your true self, which is the instinctual parts or the parts of your personality and nature that God created, but there's also this aspect, and by the way, I'm going to talk more about this aspect of developing certain parts of you. And to be honest with you, the developmental side of the soul is far greater in its potential than the stuff that's already there.
So is that what we should really focus on, looking at the bits that we need to develop and activating our will to develop that?
I would focus on both. Firstly, discovering, you've used the term rediscovering the parts that instinctually are there that you've suppressed,
Yes.
or your environment has suppressed, and more importantly, once you've discovered all those, use those things to develop your soul
Yes.
further. Because remember, your soul has an infinite capacity of expansion if it receives God's love, so you now have the prospect of developing your soul. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so they really go hand in hand, don't
Yes.
they? They need to be, we need to look at them, whatever's the right word, synergistically, or
We do.
however we do it, yeah.
We do. So this is not about... See, for many of you, you say, I want to discover the love that's inside of me. For many of you, there's no love inside of you. So good luck with that. You're never going to discover it. You're going to have to develop it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? There's a difference between discovering something that's already there and developing something that is something that you're going to have to work on or act upon through your choice of your will to develop. Yep.
Okay.
So, of course, your real emotional self has its will. How you use it, of course, is dependent upon your development.
Thank you.
Yep. Is there any other questions you'd like to ask about that? Isn't it good to write down the feelings? Because you start connecting. Oh, yes. When you first discovered divine truth, for many of you, how did you feel? Wasn't it this one? Curious, inquisitive, questioning, probing. Like there was that. Wow. Oh, I want to know more. That enthusiasm. That's a very childlike feeling, isn't it? Well, that's a part of that real self, that feeling. And then we start getting worried. You notice that? You start, I'm starting to worry about what I'm discovering now. What's now? Where's worry in this? Nowhere. No, nowhere. Well, that's some other part of yourself now. It's in operation, right? There's worry's not there. So maybe if we come down here, and who was it over here? Enter.
Phoebe. So with our passions and desires, I had an idea that it was something that God's given us all a unique passion or way of
God's
expressing.
given you the potential to develop your passions and desires.
Okay.
And
So-
some of your personality will definitely affect how or what you will passionately or desire. But actually, you can desire many things that now you currently don't desire. In other words, you can develop desire for things.
Yeah. So we have such a bigger scope maybe than what I could ever have conceived.
You have a much bigger scope. You have a universal scope. God gave you a universal playground to learn about so many different things.
and our personality will influence how we express our
Correct.
desires
It'll
and
influence
passions.
how you develop this desire, and it will also influence the first things initially that you're interested in.
Yeah.
But your personality will have an influence on those things, but your personality doesn't determine your desires or your passions because they are developed qualities. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
So in other words, you can develop new desires that you never had before. Yeah. You think about it as you're growing, isn't that the case? Like if you think about the average development of the average child, you know, when it's 3, 4, 5 years old, it's not thinking about growing up unless it's been damaged already. It's not thinking about growing up and having children or growing up and having a relationship, usually at that stage, right? But by the time it gets to puberty, another desire starts developing, right? A new one of, I'd like to have relationships now. I'd like to, you know, to discover what it's like to be in a partnership with the other half of myself. This is it's a potential in your soul, but it's something you can develop. Does that make sense? So God's created all these potentials in your real self, which you can choose to develop or choose to ignore. Most of us choose to ignore most of it, unfortunately. But we've got the potential to develop any of these things. You also have the potential to develop things negatively, right? As well. So you can develop to become unwise, totally stupid, right? You can do that too, right? Because development means that you've got the choice to go in either direction. Right? This is the choice of our will. Unfortunately, for many of us, it hasn't been the choice of our will. It's been the choice of somebody else forcing their will upon us, which we'll talk about in a minute. Does that make sense? Is there any other questions? There was Anto.
Hi, Anto. Yeah, you answered just the first part of it. The second part is, with the will, is that a combination of these elements that assists you to develop that quality of will, or?
No, the will. God's given you free will, which is a condition, like where you're allowed to make your own choices. But the development of your will itself is a different quality, which you can either develop or ignore. Many of us have ignored it. Many of us have tried to give it away, but it's all there. It's all there and it can be developed further. Does that make sense? If it couldn't be developed, Mary wouldn't have talked about strengthening your will. She would have called it discovering your will. Does that make sense? But she used the term strengthening your will because it's a quality you can strengthen and develop. Yep. Just like all other aspects of your soul. Isn't it amazing? Like, it just gives you this like, oh, okay, that means I can find out a whole heap of new things and then develop those too. Yeah. And even more importantly, you can start to get God's love, and then a whole new set of potentials become open to you that you can then choose to develop. That's just an amazing concept. I don't know what God was doing that day that he dreamed that one up, but it was pretty good. Like, I just think about that and I go, you know, what God has done with the human soul is beyond even the most advanced being at this stage in the universe to understand. That's how amazing the human soul is. If we're sorry, she's writing there.
This is something I've really misunderstood. Like,
This bit here.
no, I really thought that your desires and passions were something that was given to you as part of your personality. So what you're saying is that you can develop a desire or passion for anything.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. God placed in each of you a unique personality. And in fact, there is a part of yourself which is actually a unique part of God's personality that God chose to design within you. So in other words, each of you have a unique part of God's infinite personality built into you as a part of your personality. But that's not your desires and passions. That's your personality. Your desires and passions are completely available for you to develop.
So
So, what's the question?
Where do they come from then? Like I'm really struggling to find my passions and desires because I'm still so
Well, we'll talk about why that's the case, because it's quite easy to discover your passions and desires once you realise you're allowed to have any one of them you want. You start listing all the things you'd like to do then, right? But see, for most of us, we think we're trying to discover what God put in us. But no, we don't need to discover what God put in us. We need to use what God put in us instinctually as a part of our personality and nature to enjoy and discover life and use life to actually discover all these potentials that we have.
Does that mean, like in your 2,000 years of existence, have you had a passion and desire for everything then, really?
Yes. Doesn't it appear that way? Like, you start talking to me about the environment, I can go on for days. Right? You start talking to me about how things are made, I go on for days. You can talk to me about the human body, I can go on for days. I'm interested in everything. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of very varied interests. Right? And I'm passionate about each one because a normal part of the soul is adventurous, courageous, daring, bold, creative, brave, audacious.
Because I'm interested and curious about so many things, and I thought it was a failing because I couldn't narrow it down to something that...
Definitely not a failing. Definitely not a failing. As you develop, you'll find your interest will grow and continue to grow in more and more things. Like once we are back to our normal condition, right, you'll see how many interests we have.